Alrighty, race fans, welcome to the next edition of My Favorite Parts. So if you've been watching the first couple of editions, we've started at the front of a slot car and kind of worked our way back. We talked about chassis and guide pins, we did electrics. Well, in this particular episode, we're going to talk about magnets. And I thought a lot about, do we talk about armatures? You know, we're in the middle of the car. Do we talk about armatures first or then magnets? As I thought, well, we'll talk about magnets because a lot of you already have ready-to-run cars, so you can't do much about the armature in that. So how do you make the car better? Well, we'll talk about that with the magnets. And then after this, in the following episode, we'll talk about armatures and bushings, and then follow that up with axles and gears, and then finally with tires. So with no further delays, we're just going to get right into it. All right, so we're going to start our little discussion here talking about some major common brands of slot cars. And if you think back to the video on chassis, we talked about chassis design, you know, monocoque, semi-monocoque, and all that stuff. So now we're going to have the magnets. So a couple of things here. We've got a couple of Mega G Plus cars. That's a real popular car right now. Kind of an old legacy lifelike M car, lifelike T car, which is getting into the legacy world. Obviously Tyco 440 X2. This one's got hop-up magnets in it, and this one is a box stock, and we'll have close-ups on those in a minute. We have a Wizard Storm. This particular one's a modified car. We have our Super 7, and then a couple of high-end Vipers. We'll talk more specifically about that. And just for good measure, we have an Auto World X-Traction chassis, a couple of sets of magnets. These are 42s for Mega G Plus. These are the Tyco motor and traction magnets. These are Viper motor and traction magnets. And then a couple of tools that will let us analyze what we're doing. This particular thing right here is a piece of film that reacts to magnetic energy and can kind of give you a picture of what's going on, and that may be important when you're trying to do car setup. And then we'll get out our special little meter here. It's called a Gaus meter. These actually aren't very expensive. I think maybe less than $100 on eBay. They're pretty handy dandy when you're trying to solve problems. So, all right, so let's zoom in and start talking about some of these specifics. We'll start the discussion with a popular chassis for a variety of reasons, who knows what, but we'll look at Mega G Plus because that's really what's being sold in the market right now. And these two cars, this one here is pretty much a box stock, and this one here I've fixed up a little bit, probably changed the traction magnets in it. So let's get out our Gaus meter and see what our Gaus numbers are. Now this is very imprecise because that's reading about 1600 and that's reading about 2000. So yeah, this is indeed box stock. Yeah. All right, so let's start this discussion with what magnets are doing for us. A couple of things. They're needed to run a DC motor. That's a discussion all on its own. The internet and the world is full of all kinds of discussions on the functioning of a DC motor. So you know, I'm not going to take much time on that, but just avail yourself of that and understand the process of how a DC motor works. And magnets are a part of that. And we may touch a little bit of that later in armatures, but for now, what's really more important is traction magnets. Motor magnets can come into play a little bit, but traction magnets, that's our artificial gravity and aerodynamic downforce. And for all of you people out there that followed racing over the years, you know, you've seen regular race cars from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and how they've evolved with aerodynamics and what that does for the car. But in HO, and even to some degree the other slot car scales, gravity and wind resistance doesn't really scale down. In 1/24th, you get some wing cars, and this is big enough to where it can actually work for you. But in HO, none of that works. So our artificial downforce is the magnets. So the traction magnets is what's most important. So with these particular Mega G Plus cars, the traction magnets are right in here. You get no magnetic eminence coming out of the motor. That can motor, that metal can, is a flux collector that's basically containing all the magnetic energy inside there for the armature. So this is our only means of downforce. You get into a 4-magnet car like a Tyco 440, you do have motor magnets and traction magnets where the motor magnets can actually do a little bit of work for you. But if I'm a kind of a Porsche fan and followed Porsche racing over the years, and if you really look into the history of probably one of the greatest race cars of all time is Porsche 917. You look at the development in 1969 when they first got that thing out. It was a terrible car. Drivers were actually afraid of it. It was groundbreaking for the time. It had 450 to 500 horsepower. It was just a beast for its day. The biggest problem was it handled terribly. I mean, there's stories of drivers going down the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans, looking in the rearview mirror, and the whole back of the car is dancing around. The initial shape of the car was absolutely aerodynamically slick as grease. It was incredible. The problem was they didn't have any rear wing of any consequence on it, and they didn't, I don't think, really understood what was going on. And the story is, in a track test day one time, one of the engineers got to looking at the car, and he saw bugs all over the front, but no bugs on the back of the car or the top of the car or anywhere else on the car. So he realized real quickly the car is punching a nice clean hole through the air, but it had no downforce. That was what was causing the handling problem. Well, they went around the pits and got sheet metal and cobbled it together and riveted it to the back of the car and created kind of a wedgy deck on there, put the car back out on the racetrack, and lo and behold, the Porsche 917K that we know and love was essentially born right there. It fixed that car. So traction magnets for us are that sort of thing. It's our artificial aerodynamics and ground force. So just to kind of jump back a little bit, original magnet traction cars relied solely on the motor magnets here to provide downforce to the track. And there's a whole, there's been books written. So in this discussion with the Porsche cars about, lack of downforce early on, and then they figured out how to give it more downforce. Well, you look at a popular Auto World X traction car. It's modeled off the old Aurora magnet traction, where you had the motor magnets that are dropped down below the car that actually did provide some downforce to the rail. Actually, I think old magnet traction cars work really, really well. Set of tires on them and a few things, and they can be interesting cars. The problem with the Auto World is, many of you know, is quality is a little sketchy. So they put a plug fix on it. They put a neodymium magnet on there. So that's just kind of like adding a big old wing to the back of the car to help this thing handle better. Here's some magnetic film. And if we put that over the car, you'll see real quick where you've got these flux lines from the motor magnets. You see how that would work, to provide downforce onto the rail. See if this, putting a piece of steel down there, that doesn't do much, but that just shows you the magnetic energy coming out of that. So we get into a stock Mega G Plus car, and so looking at that film, there's nothing in the motor box area up in here. There's absolutely nothing. Okay, but you can see you've got a pretty concentrated area there with the traction magnets. Now the next one is a sportier version where we've added better front and rear axles, and we've put in level 42 traction magnets. So there you go with that. So I don't know if we could do a side-by-side comparison of those two films there to see what which one looks better, but suffice to say, you know, if we look at this with the Gaus meter, turn this back on, we're getting about 2,000 Gauss out of that one, and the stock magnets are about 1,600, I think. Yeah. Okay. So we'll run on down the line here. Mcars, it's a very interesting car where you've got motor and traction magnets that are doing double work. This particular car, if you look at the patent drawing, the whole point of this design when Jim Russell designed this and actually pulled a patent was to get this form factor as low as possible. He wanted a car that had a really low center of gravity. And if you look at more other traditional slot cars, because of the motor magnets, traditional motor magnets, they've got a far higher center of gravity. So he understood that if he can lower the center of gravity, he's going to get a better handling car. Well, what he did is he created this car that had two big magnets that are the same polarity. These are not north and south like you would have in a traditional slot car where one side's north and one side's south, so you can have a DC motor. The key is this flux collector, okay? What this thing does is this thing projects a phantom magnetic pole from the top of the car and the bottom of the car, okay? And it's not a side-to-side thing. So if you take this flux collector off, the car hardly runs at all, okay? But the original cars had ceramic. These are Hardin Creek level 4s. And in this particular design chassis, level 4 is about as strong as you can go before this phenomenon of a phantom field starts to fall apart. Back in the day when this car was really popular, I've heard stories where guys were, you know, putting cobalt magnets in them and whatever, and it was just a huge problem. The car's heating up and one thing and another, but at some point in time, that's all they had. So we'll look at the film on this. So there you go. A couple of really big magnets, and then get this little tool here. You'll see that those magnets center up right over the rail, okay? So these cars are really kind of interesting, and with the standard factory car, a lot of guys are just taking the level 4s and putting them in there. Maybe they'll put a set of silicon tires on it, maybe they'll run just the standard factory tire, but it really does help the car. It's like adding a lot of wing to your car. All right, next up is a lifelike T-car. This was a follow-on to Mcar. The main idea behind this was to have a car that was far more simple to put together than an Mcar. That's a discussion for another day. But anyway, here we are, and you'll see that it has a really strange magnetic field with the film. The little traction magnets don't offer you much. They really don't. Now T-cars have a lot of downforce when they're on the track, because I mean you've got these Neo motor magnets in here, these Neo slabs, and then you come along with these Neo dots. It has a lot of downforce. The problem is when you really drive the car hard, because you have such a narrow magnetic field. When you look at this, okay, your main downforce is back in here, and if that car starts to bobble in a turn, off you go. Where an Mcar, although it's a touch slower, you have a much wider magnetic field. And Mcars, I think, are really popular with a lot of guys even today because you can drive them pretty hard, but if you kind of overdrive them a little bit in the corner, it'll kind of let you know it might bobble a little bit, and you know, okay, maybe that next lap I'm not going to take that turn that fast. It's just a really unique design and a lot of fun to drive once you kind of work all the problems out of them. All right, Tyco 440X2, probably for inline as a lot of guys' starting place in terms of you know, getting into slot cars nowadays. There's plenty of new old stock laying around. We've got parts for them: pickup shoes, brushes, armatures, the magnets, gear sets, you know, all that's aftermarket or whatever. So the only thing we don't have, really, quite honestly, is bulkheads and chassis. So if you wreck those, then you're kind of out of luck. But other than that, we can keep them going. Now, the factory car, as it comes, the traction magnets are monopolarity. In other words, they're both either north or south. Well, what happens is it kind of puts the car, half of it in high downforce and half of it in low downforce. Now, these are all ceramic magnets, and it doesn't make a lot of difference on a toy track where you're going real slow. But you get them on these routed tracks today, and the factory magnets are just not enough. Now, one of the things about the 440 is these factory motor magnets are recessed into the car. In order for these magnets to really kind of do any work to the rail, they've got to be flush with the bottom of the chassis, okay? And that's evidenced by designs, modern designs like Viper, BSRT, Wizard, where your motor magnets and your traction magnets are all on the same plane, so they can all have some effect on the rail. So we sell hop-up magnets for Tyco 440, and you can see here with this pair here, got a little notch on the bottom. Okay, that notch right there, this is the top, but this little notch, the way these magnets are made, is it allows that magnet to hang down even with the bottom of the chassis. So, get the light on here. So you can see right there how that's even with the bottom of the chassis. So this particular car has level 8 motor magnets, level 10 traction magnets, probably a 3.5 ohm armature in there. And let's look at its magnetic patch. Now right there, if you look at that, that's a really good magnetic patch. I mean, this is kind of textbook, where you've got, you can see the motor magnets and then the traction magnets. And this is a high downforce situation, which means you have, let's just say, that's the north motor magnet. Well, then that would be the south traction magnet, okay? So what's happening here is, you know, the whole idea is when you put the car on the track, the rail kind of acts as a conduit may not be the right word, but a connection, or it bridges the connection between the two magnets and causes the magnets to want to work against the rail more, as opposed to having both north or both south where you have low downforce. Right, so you can see how there is some projection into the motor box. That's part of the armature. That's the laminations of the armature, and of course this is the Gauss lines coming out of the motor magnets. All right, we'll move along to a Wizard Storm. And here again, really nice classic projection, and set up in high downforce. These are level 10 motor magnets and traction magnets because this was a modified. And here again you can see the laminations of the armature where these motor magnets are having some effect on that. Okay. We'll get into Super 7, which is back down the scale in terms of magnetic downforce. Ceramic motor magnets and then level 10 traction magnets. And because we don't have the mass in the traction magnets, like say a Wizard Storm does, and then the closer proximity, you would see that the Gauss lines from the Storm magnets are kind of coming into the motor box, where you don't see that on a lower power car like Super 7. Okay, but still, even though we have a can motor, those motor magnets are still doing work in projecting energy down to the rail. And then just for giggles, we'll take a look at some higher magnet Viper cars. This one here is a 1025 car, level 10 motor, level 25 tractions, probably 2.5 to 2 ohm armature in that. Really strong, defined field. And you can see how much energy, you know, these powerful magnets push into the motor box, and how that's affecting the armature. And then finally, this is what we call a drop-in Neo car. At level 42 motor magnets, level 52 tractions. Very big field. If I can manipulate this around. But you can see how the magnets are so strong, how the lines are flowing into the motor box. Get our Gaus meter over here. And check some stuff just to kind of give you all a little bit of idea how much energy these different magnet packages put out. So, our magnet traction car, very, very little, couple 300 Gauss coming out of that. But then on the helper button, you can see where now we're moving around here too much. Let's get it right on there. Yeah, there we go. We've looked at these here. We know what those are. The Mcar. Now, this is a pretty good example where you can take this and move it all over the magnet, and you get different readings over the magnet. Okay, you get hot spots, cold spots, but most of the time you want to take a meter like this and put it like right in the middle of the magnet. That's kind of where you want to check. But you can see even with that how much the meter fluctuates. So you call something like this 14.25 maybe 1450 in terms of Gauss. All right, T-car. Here again, we get right on the magnet and like, wow, that's a really big number, 2800, but it's a really small magnet. And because of that, that field is so small that if the car bobbles a lot, you'll break it right off the track really, really easy, really quick. And the motor magnets, even though those are neodymium, they're only putting out 1200 in there. All right, Tyco 440 standard. All right, these have got, this particular one is level 8 in it. I put level 8s in it. I was sorry, I didn't catch that. I thought it was box stock ceramic, but they're not. So 1800. And then of course the motor box, you don't have much coming out, a couple hundred Gauss. All right, we can go to this. These are level 10s. So 21, 22, and then on the edge of that, you can see now we're running how much more energy you get out of the motor box to the rail. You know, is 1300 Gauss. All right. Wizard Storm. $1,400, $1,500. Let's get that right over there. These are a little hard to measure because the magnets have a bit of an arc to it. So about 1,400, 1,500 out of those motor magnets as well. All right, Super 7. Measure the ceramic magnets, the motor box. So 800, 900, 1,000, depending if you can hold the thing still enough. And then the traction magnets. So they've got good readings, 1,800, but here again, because they are a little less in terms of volume over, say, a storm car, they won't do as much work because of the volume, although the actual energy might be the same. All right, then our level 25 car. $1,500, $1,600 on the motors. 2,300, 2,400 on the tractions. That one's 3,000, 3,200. Let's go back to this one. So there we go. Yeah, there's the center, nice hot spot. 3,300. So you have to kind of run it around a little bit and kind of get an average of what you think that a magnet is, because it's just not a stable thing. It just isn't. And these 42s, these are a couple thousand Gauss. And then the tractions. So look at that. You got 4,000 Gauss coming out of those things. There you go. Just depends on how much where I'll hold it. Let me put my thumb on that. Yeah, that's a little better. 4,100. Hold it still. 4,300. It's a lot of energy. A lot of energy. A car like this might have 1.5 pounds of downforce. All right, so we'll get into one other little test here real quick to kind of put some rubber to the road. Alrighty guys, there's a couple different ways you can actually then figure out how much work your magnets are doing. And what I'm going to show you here is just kind of a relative system to compare two similar cars to each other, or a couple of different cars, because the design of the magnet has a lot to do with how the car handles. It's not just about raw energy coming out of the car. So this is a dial indicator, and 15 years ago I started with this as a tool, and what it can do is It's got a telltale indicator. See that right there? So what I would do is I'd take a car, stick it on the track, and then break it off and to see how much downforce it has. Right, so that's pretty consistent right there. And let's just try our favorite Mcar here. Actually, a little less. Just a touch, just a touch. But I'd take the Mcar over the Mega G Plus any day. We'll go to our T car. This is probably going to have some more. We'll see. Now look at that. Ooh, 150. 150. But from my practical experience, the cars, they can be a little difficult to drive at times because they just don't let you know that they're unhappy at speed, and you can just go right into the wall. All right. Our Tyco 440, standard Tyco with level 8 motor magnets. It's 100. Oh, that's 200. Let's try it again. And a quarter. Yeah, that's probably about the accurate number there. But I think a hopped up Tyco with these can actually drive harder than the T car, simply because your magnetic patch is just so much greater here. And we'll get into our heavy duty Tyco magnet package. Solid 150. Solid 150. All right. Super 7. $100 and a quarter. $100 and a quarter. All right, so this car here, in my opinion, the way this one is set up, you know, it's going to drive probably about like this particular Tyco in terms of its ability to handle speed. This here's got so much downforce that you probably wouldn't be able to keep up with that. Wizard level 10. Let's look at that. $200. $200. Now, once we get into chassis like Wizard, Scale Auto, Viper, these numbers then you can start to compare them to where they'll actually mean something within a certain class of car. All this other stuff, because the chassis are so different, although you may get a number that's high, it may not translate to handling on the track because of the simple design of the magnets. Let's try our level 25 car. Wow, look at that. It won't even pull off. We're going all the way around. It pushed the thing all the way over here. So that's a lot of downforce, and I'm not even going to waste time on the Neo car. Now, this is old school. When I started, there was none of this other electronic meters that were out there that you see today, and a lot of guys like that because it's electric and it's got, you know, high technology. Maybe. So let's look at these here. Now, all these meters are doing is just using a scale, a standard scale, and they put a plate in there, and it's pulling up on the strain gauge as opposed to pushing down, and it still gives you a number that's a readout. Anybody that's building these scales will tell you no two scales is exactly the same, so here again it's a bit of a relative thing. So even across different guys that are making different scales, you know, 240 on this gauge, it may be something different on somebody else's gauge. So don't say, well, my gauge says and your gauge is wrong, and this is not. I mean, I could have 10 of these things, and although they're calibrated when they leave the guy's place, they could all read just a slight bit different. All right. Get our Mcar. So 1150. And here again, don't get into the fallacy that just because your gauge says, well, this car has this number here and some completely different car has this number here, that they're equal cars. That is not the case. Motors can be different. Chassis handling characteristics can be different. So I would only use something like this if you are within a class of, you know, okay guys, today we're going to be racing Mcars, and you want to check to see what your downforce is, or T-cars or something else like that, kind of a one platform class. Now it's interesting here, the T-car is only showing like 500, where the Mcar is 1150. Okay, well, these are really big magnets, so it's got a lot of energy to pull on that plate. But from a break-off standpoint, you know, depending, sometimes this car here, because those little neo-magnets in a static situation, may exhibit more power. All right, look at our 440 with level 8s. Okay, 800. And then the one that's got level 8 motors and level 10 tractions, 1100. Check our Wizard, 1200. But, okay, so this Wizard's showing 1260. And this 440 is showing 1100. Yeah, kind of close. But these two cars are night and day. Right, I mean, the Wizard, this particular Wizard in this instance, if you were to put both these on the track, the Wizard's just going to blow the doors off the Tyco simply because of the chassis better. All right, go to our level 25 Viper, 1800, and then our drop-in Neo car, nearly 3000. Okay. So that kind of gives you a couple different ways that you can look at magnets, evaluate them, and figure out, you know, what your car needs to make it happy. We'll get into talking a little bit more about magnets when we talk about armatures, but kind of the point of all this was focusing a lot on a car's downforce. And then our more traditional 4-magnet cars, they're relying on the traction magnets to get there. Interestingly enough, Lifelike, just as a side note, when they were developing T-car, I actually have a sample. I forgot how I came about it, and then I'm unsure that the person I got it from, how he came about it, but it literally must be some sort of pre-production factory sample, because it doesn't have any of these Neo buttons here. All this, there's not even a place for them. So evidently when they were first developing T-car, they didn't have any extra helper magnets. They thought it would, the motor magnets would be enough. But I put it on the track and ran it. Oh, and you talk about a boat anchor, it's terrible. So I guess in testing and pre-production, they realized that they needed to do something to help it out. So they put some buttons in there, maybe as a bit of an afterthought. So traction magnets do make a difference. It's like adding a wing. And going back to our Porsche stories, the 1969 917 was a very, very aerodynamic car, had virtually no aerodynamic downforce. And then you fast forward a couple of years to the 917-30 Can-Am car that had at least 1200 horsepower, twin turbo. They say maybe on sprints they could crank the turbo up and get 1500 horsepower. And you look at that car and the monster wing on the back of that. I mean, you had to have that much wing on that car to harness that much power. So, and then of course fast forward today to all the modern cars with their underbody trays and whatever else that could theoretically, if you had some way to race it upside down, there's so much downforce, aerodynamic downforce, that it would literally stick upside down if you had like a tunnel that the car could just run into and then turn upside down. That'd be kind of an interesting race, actually, to have that as a feature, you know. But anyway, all right, so we'll wrap that up for now. We'll get into motors next, and after that we'll take a look at some gears.